Hey everyone, welcome to a special episode of the Coach's Corner University podcast. It's the first podcast that we're doing in person, and it's in my living room, and you will see our lovely co-host. This is Pork Chop, that is Stella, and over the course of the episode, I'm sure you'll meet Beefcake. As usual, our podcast is sponsored by Coach's Corner University. You can go visit coachescorneru.com and use code podcast300 to save $300 off of our education collective, which is over 200 hours of continuing education resources, as well as discounts on continuing education courses. We're also sponsored by TC Nutrition, Barefoot Shoes, and Bacon and Barbells. You can find links to discount codes in the description below. Today, I'm joined by longtime friend, Dan Frankel. Dan is a physiotherapist, strength coach, and he's in town visiting to spend some time and to visit some friends and get some training in. So we figured, why not sit down on a podcast? Dan, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So why don't you start off, give the whole spiel of like who you are and how you got to my couch.
So by trade, I am a physiotherapist and a strength and conditioning coach. I've been a strength and conditioning coach for far longer than I've been a physio. I started coaching when I was about 14, 15 years old. I was a gymnast at the time. Not a very good one, but I was a gymnast. And I started coaching at my local gymnastics club. And then when I went off to undergrad, which was when we met, I started to get into a little bit of varsity strength and conditioning. Started working with a bunch of different individuals at a CrossFit gym at Queen Street Fitness, coaching one-on-one type situations, as well as up to 1 to 30. People of all ages, performance levels, levels of competitiveness and fitness. And then as time went on, I started to get a little bit more involved in the clinical role, working with people who have injuries, various physical impairments and disabilities or just general injuries that are preventing them from living the life that they want to live from a physical standpoint. And now I kind of combine all of those aspects into one role.
And so you started your company, Propel Fitness Solutions, this year, right?
Yes.
Now, when we met, what year of school were you in?
I was in my first year.
Really?
That was 2013.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2013. I think I was 26 when I was at Queens. So did you do your undergrad in kin?
Yeah. Studied kinesiology at Queens and then studied physiotherapy at McMaster.
Okay. Now, why start another company? Like, I know you were working in a clinical practice. You were at 2 or 3 different clinics, which is the norm, right? Most practitioners will have multiple in-person practices. Why transition online, or why transition part of your business online?
So when I started working as a physio, I really was keen on going into the traditional clinical environment. Not really knowing what that entailed. I just wanted to be a physiotherapist and I wanted to work in orthopedics. And the way that you tend to do that and to sort of bridge the gap into sports, which is also where I wanted to go, was you start at a clinic, you see individuals for various orthopedic concerns. The model is pretty similar for most clinics. You're seeing, 8 to 13 people a day. It's very rigid 30-minute appointments. You're seeing them for very discrete injuries. If they have multiple injuries, that can sort of complicate the treatment plan in the sense that, somebody's coming in for their shoulder for 30 minutes and okay, now all of a sudden there's an ankle issue. And that sort of a situation would happen more and more as you see more and more people, which is people are complex and they have multiple things going on. And the conventional model doesn't really support it doesn't support what I would call like a client-centered model of care, as opposed to just looking at like one specific joint or one specific problem. But people are complex, and I didn't really feel that I jived well with the traditional model, and I've always been a bit of a black sheep, so I decided I was going to do things my way.
What do you mean by client-centered care? Because I have, obviously I've spoken a lot on the podcast about like client-centered coaching. I'm sure there's some parallels there. Yeah, you got to Google.
That's okay.
I mean, the perks of in-person, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So what would you say was the parallel between like a client-centered coaching model versus client-centered clinical model?
So I maybe we'll zoom out first. So
Sure.
so client-centered care is to me means something very, very specific. So when we were in physio school, we learned about this very pivotal research paper that I think was by Sackett in 1991. Who I actually don't know what his profession was, but I think he worked in healthcare, and he wrote about this idea of a new model of healthcare called client-centered care, which means that when we're working as professionals with clients or patients in whatever role it is, we're forming a treatment plan for that individual where we're taking information from three very specific places.
Okay.
So the first is we're taking the information from the client's history, lived beliefs, attitudes, experiences. We're championing them as the hero of their own story. We're taking all of the things that they have lived through and using that to inform part of our treatment plan. I'll kind of delve into that in a minute. That's pillar one. Pillar two is we're taking our own expertise as clinicians or coaches. So we have the privilege to have seen 500 knee injuries or 1,000 people trying to, succeed at a powerlifting competition. That expertise is very useful and meaningful. And then the third pillar is we're taking information from the best available evidence that we have access to and applying it to the context that we're dealing with. And so this is kind of in contrast to what we would call the old way of doing things, which is the professional as the authoritative expert. Right. I'm the doctor, so you'll listen to me. I'm the coach, so you'll listen to me. So prevalent. And it's still, unfortunately, way, way too prevalent, but it's nowhere near as effective. And the reason is because we're with that model, we're not really taking into account what the individual in front of us needs. And so a really simple example of this would be like, if somebody is coming to the table to deal with a knee injury, and they've been training for 10 years versus somebody who's never trained before a day before in their life, in the former circumstance, like we have 10 years worth of data to go off of what worked, what didn't work. Are there certain things that we might want to try with that individual or dissect as to, to what degree did it work or not work or why? Mm-hmm. And we don't want to necessarily disregard our expertise or the evidence that we have access to, but we have to combine all three of these elements into one formalized plan. And that is, in my opinion, an effective way of doing it, whether you are a physiotherapist working with a patient, whether you're a coach working with an athlete, right. Whether you're a doctor working with a patient. It's just the idea that if we're truly, truly providing a client-centered method of care, we have to take into account evidence, best available evidence, the expertise we have as clinicians or specialists, and the history, attitudes, lived beliefs, and experiences of that client.
Well, I mean, it makes sense because it's the exact same way that I coach, mm-hmm. right? It's like,
sure.
You can't, using me as an example, when I entered into my, knee injury journey, mm-hmm. my physio was fantastic, but he was fantastic not because he had some massive amount of additional expertise. Mm-hmm. He was fantastic because he actually listened to me. Mm-hmm. And I think that in and of itself, for most coaches, providers, it's your biggest asset is your ears. Mm-hmm. We talk about it all the time, like with regards to like sales calls mm-hmm. and things like that. Mm-hmm. If you operate sales calls the same way you operate a client interview, mm-hmm. you're listening 70, 80% of the mm-hmm. time, you're talking 20, mm-hmm. because the more information that you have, the better informed your decisions can be. Mm-hmm. One of the things that always strikes me is that those clinicians or coaches who have a very, we'll call it evidence-based model, mm-hmm. don't tend to get the best results because they tie themselves to evidence from research mm-hmm. more than the evidence from the clinic or from the weight room. How do you find the balance between the two?
I am very heavily weighted towards the client. Not to say that I disregard the evidence, because I'm a very evidence-based practitioner, but I find myself weighing my approach much more towards the clinical expertise plus the client's history and lived beliefs and experiences, because of the fact that every single person that you work with is an individual who is unique in their own way. And so we want to have ideas of things that will work with certain people, but we also, I think it's important to be willing to or able or ready to throw the entire plan out the window if it's appropriate to do so, because somebody has needs that maybe come about as you move forward in the coaching relationship, or let's say somebody all of a sudden gets an injury and you had this 12-week long plan, and we're not going to just continue the 12-week long plan. Like, we might have to completely pivot and go with the now of what the person is experiencing.
I think that plays well into the fact that most people forget that the clinical evidence, like what you read in research, is an amalgamation of averages. So it's like, this worked for the average person, but for some people it worked really, really well, and for some people it didn't do anything. And I don't like saying this because I think most people believe that they're snowflakes when they're not really snowflakes, but most people are outliers in some capacity. And a lot of the evidence that we'll read in research is single modality, very controlled environment, when in reality, the human body is an interconnected system of systems. The human experience is an interconnected, mosaic of different experiences. So putting all of that together can't be whittled down into this, like, at 4 weeks you'll do this, at 6 weeks you'll do this. And I found for me in the coaching practice, the same applies for, okay, you need to diet for 12 weeks and then do a maintenance phase for 8 weeks and then another diet for 12 weeks. It's like, well, but if at 12 weeks you're still losing weight, why would we do a maintenance phase if that's the goal, is to continue to lose weight? I find it so refreshing to hear when even young coaches understand that, because you've been coaching for a very long time, but you've been in practice a shorter amount of time. And I think, would you say that your experience on the gym floor working with so many people has been a pivotal aspect of you shaping your philosophy moving forward?
100%. And to the point that when I speak now with younger clinicians or people who are trying to get into physio school and they're wondering, like, what sorts of experiences should they acquire, the first thing that I tell all of them is, go teach exercise to as many different types of people as you can in as many different settings as you can. Because I think that being in those situations where we're faced with people who are, and situations who are not textbook, like they're not crystal clear textbook cases, fosters this critical analysis type of skill that you need to be an effective coach or healthcare practitioner.
I mean, not only that, you're also working with a large number of people.
That too, 100%. You get your reps in, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, when you were working at the CrossFit gym, how many people would you see in a
Oh my God. We would do 5 classes in a day of 30 people per class.
So it was a busy gym.
It was a busy gym. It was great. We were changing people's lives at a really positive and large scale. And so as a result, by the time I was, 22, 23, I had already coached like well over 1,000 people, which, as I've sort of come to understand, is not the norm, but that was just like what I was doing.
It expedites everything. It expedites
100%.
your learning. It expedites your thought process. I think also it kind of opens your mind, because nowadays people are jumping right into online. There's like, I have a degree, I'm going to online coach. But you miss the ability to talk to people. And if you don't have that ability to talk to people in person, it makes it even harder to translate that ability to talk to people online. Because you can speak to it, it's a different medium.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, you're not there in person. The way that you speak to them has to change. The way that you approach looking at movement has to change when you're trying to use your observation skills as a coach. The way that you are getting the information from them in terms of like, what do their sets look like and their heavier weights look like you're relying on video that's being sent to you. And it's very different than just standing there watching as it unfolds. Doesn't mean it's any less effective. I think it's more effective because it allows you to scale. It allows you to reach more people at scale to a very effective degree. But the approach is very different.
How so?
Well, we're not, like, I'm not standing in front of 30 people coaching them in a fitness class the same way that I would in the old CrossFit gym that I was working at. I can still positively affect those same 30 people, but it might be on a more individualized basis with the coaching methodology that I use, which is a little bit more of a personalized individual approach. Certainly there are people who do one-to-many. I tend to focus a little bit more on the one-to-one, but it's different than being in a gym. And I think that it's important to spend a little bit of time, to spend a reasonable amount of time on the gym floor and work with people first and foremost to get an understanding of what that coaching process is like.
I totally agree. And the reason I'm diving in is just to kind of not belabor the point, but like really push people who are listening to realize that you are the sum of your experiences. Mm-hmm. So the more experiences that you can have, the better off you will be. I actually just had a call with a young coach who he's been personal training for a long time. He did his master's degree, and then he's been coaching for a couple of years, and he got an opportunity to do a PhD. And he wanted to jump on and be like, hey, why didn't you do your PhD? What was the decision there? And my decision was purely based on return on investment. I didn't think I could make more money just by having doctor in front of my name.
Sure.
Totally fair. But I also had 6 years of collegiate strength and conditioning experience, having worked with, at that point, like 5,000 athletes. He didn't. And this personal PhD program was actually him working as a strength coach and doing research on the athletes that he was working with at the college and professional level. Not only that, but to do it overseas. And I was like, dude, you're dumb if you don't take this experience. And my advice to him was, listen, start an online business so that you can at least pay your bills and not be in debt. But there is no reason why you shouldn't take this experience, because the experience is what's going to make you money. And in talking to him, I think you'll like this. So I have this model of kind of the evolution of a coach, where you start off by imitating people. You learn and then you imitate. So you learn from, Joe Coach, you try to implement his system as it is. Then you learn from Jane Coach and you try to implement her system as it is. And over time, the more people that you learn from, you start to integrate them together. You take the good pieces of this, you throw out that, and you get into this integration stage. And once you've gotten to the integration stage, you accumulate experience. Now you have the innovation stage. I think very few people actually progress to the innovation stage where they develop intellectual property of their own. But unless you have many experiences, you can't even get to the integration phase.
Absolutely.
And I think that you're in that process of integrating now, because you've learned from so many people and you're starting your own business. You're going to accumulate even more experiences, and then you will start to innovate. Is that process something that you feel is conscious, or you feel like it's just part of the way you do things?
For me, it's very conscious.
Okay.
I'm very much so. I journal a lot, especially in the last maybe 8 to 10 months. I've started journaling quite a bit, and the thing that a theme that has consistently come about for me is I'm noticing that I'm feeling that I'm stepping out into the abyss now. I'm no longer working for somebody else. I'm trying to really take control of my own life and feel very positive about the actions that I'm taking to do so. But it's very much stepping out into the unknown. And when I go through that sort of a process, as I've done in learning, trying to learn French, trying to play guitar, trying to any of the other skills that I've learned, I have a very silly but really effective life philosophy that I have embodied.
Silly?
It's a very silly philosophy. So if you're trying to get good at anything, you have to start off being terrible at it, right? Being terrible is a prerequisite to being good at things.
Yeah.
And so 80-20 rule, 80% of the outcome comes from 20% of the efforts. Applied to this means that if you aim to be bad at things, your being bad will actually be much better than you think it will be. And that can be enough, for me at least, to carry me over the oh, I'm afraid that this isn't going to work out. I'm afraid I'm not going to be good enough at that. So I try new things aiming to be bad at them, very actively trying to be bad at them, because it's very easy to be bad at things. But you're going to end up actually being much better than you think you're going to be. Though, man. It's very scary.
It's scary to admit that you suck. And when you're speaking, I'm like, knowing that we've worked together in a business capacity, I would find it so challenging because essentially your role is the same. So when you were in a clinical practice, you were very good at what you were doing. Then you step into this new role in the online space. To accept that you are initially going to suck at something that you were previously very proficient in must be very challenging.
100%. I've coached for 15 years, and now I'm like, okay, cool. Now I have to learn about all of these new things. And specifically, there's something I've been remarking to people around me when they've asked about my business and my growth recently. I have spent the last 15 years learning about muscles and bones and not about marketing and advertising and sales. Like I vehemently was against learning about any of that. My dad is a businessman. He's a very successful businessman, and he would try to give me advice, and I would be like, no, I don't want to listen to that. Like kinesiology, exercise science. And now I'm like, oh, Dad, like tell me all of the things that you can tell me, because now this is where my continuing education is. It's not to say that I'm not continuing to learn about muscles and bones, but that's the like 10% versus the 90% is now this wonderful wide world of business that I never have spent any time on before.
It's something that I like, if there was a hill I would die on, it's that your knowledge is not what's holding you back from helping people.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is that, like, in order to elicit a change, like a physical adaptation with a client,
mm-hmm.
you don't need to be a biophysicist.
Mm-hmm.
You need to know about sets and reps. You need
mm-hmm.
to know how the body moves.
Mm-hmm.
But beyond that, anything else to me is a bonus.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know first and foremost how to speak to people.
Mm-hmm.
You have to know a lot about psychology.
Mm-hmm.
You have to learn how to communicate. But then further to that, when you step into business on your own, you need to learn how to sell to people.
Sure.
Because if you can't sell your services, you can't help anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the pieces of advice that I say, and I think I know for a fact you agree with me on because you do it, is reading outside of your field.
Yeah.
Like that's something that you believe in very powerfully.
Yeah.
I know you're an avid
100%.
reader. Have you always been an avid reader?
No, I started reading like a year and a half ago.
Really?
So yeah. Okay. So this is the silliest story. So I was scrolling Instagram or TikTok. This was now, maybe about 2 years ago now, and I saw an ad for a portable hammock, like one of those little hammocks that folds up in like a little bag, whatever. It's like $15.
Okay.
And I was like, oh man, like I'll get a hammock. I'll go sit in the park. So I bought the hammock, and then very quickly realized that I needed something to do in the hammock. So I brought a book that I had just had sitting on my shelf for the last like 3 years, 4 years, read the book, got another book, read the book, got another book, read the book, got another. And it was like this positive feedback loop where I started reading all of these books. And then I realized, oh, now I have all of the knowledge in all of these books. Oh my God, that was so easy. Now I want to learn more things.
Did you want to learn, or did you want to just sit in the hammock?
It was a combination of both, but it very much shifted gradually to, whoa, there's all of this information in all of these books that I could just learn if I sit down and read them. And now I'm extremely, extremely interested in learning about psychology and philosophy, anthropology, and business tend to be the four things that I read about.
Yeah, I never, outside of like strength and conditioning stuff, I was never a big reader. I probably started reading 7 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
7 years ago was like, I was going through a really challenging time, and I felt like I only had training and work in my
mm-hmm.
life,
mm-hmm.
and I needed to step outside. So I started reading different things about philosophy. I started
mm-hmm.
reading about stoicism.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got into a lot more like fiction. I just started reading fiction. I was
mm-hmm.
like, oh, I can actually entertain myself and make pictures in my own head as opposed to watching them on TV.
Yep.
But what I came to realize is that you get a different experience reading than you do watching something.
Yep.
Even a YouTube video, like
Yep.
an educational YouTube video versus reading it.
Yep.
To me, it's night and day. Like
mm-hmm.
I'll pick the book every time because it allows you to kind of go through it on your own pace and then also interpret it in the way that you want to interpret
mm-hmm.
it
mm-hmm.
versus what someone else's interpretation of that information is. Now, full circle, when we talk about my interpretation of knowledge versus someone else's interpretation of knowledge, now that's the catalyst for getting to the innovation stage.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, without reading, you can't get to the innovation stage.
Sure.
Because otherwise, you're just learning about how other people integrate,
Yep.
and you're never
Yep.
going to figure out how to do it on your own. I love it. So the next piece is, I want to talk to you about training for health
mm-hmm.
versus training for performance.
Mm-hmm.
Because you've lived it on both sides. You've competed in Olympic weightlifting at a very high level. You've also done gymnastics at a very
mm-hmm.
high level. My personal opinion is that training for performance and training for health are not the same thing.
Not in the slightest.
Okay. Talk to me about it.
So if we're training for performance, we're trying to achieve a very, very specific, typically physical in the context of this conversation, based goal. And that is, in a lot of circumstances, going to come at the expense of health. We're going to, if let's say you want to compete at I'll use Olympic weightlifting as an example. If you want to compete at the highest level you can, your life is regimented to the point where you might have a very huge minimalization of your social life.
Yeah.
You are eating very specific things at very specific times. You're going to sleep at very specific times. Everything revolves around the training. And if that is important to you, cool. If that's your goal, amazing. Like, let's achieve, as a coach, like, let's help you achieve that thing. If you're training for general health and longevity, to me, that means that you're trying to train or exercise or work out. I prefer the term training, but you're trying to train for the purpose of participating in your life to the most functional and best extent that you can. That might mean being able to play with your kids, be able to get down on the ground and throw them up in the air. It might mean being able to have the stamina to wash your car on the driveway. Like, it depends on the person that we're talking about. And the goals and the processes that will pertain to those health-based goals is going to look very different than, okay, I'm trying to become an Olympic gold medal winning Olympic weightlifter, so I'm going to train 9 sessions a week, squat, pull, press, everything revolves around the snatch and the clean and jerk, versus let's build general strength, general endurance, general mobility, coordination, balance. There's overlap for sure. Somebody who's training for health and longevity may also snatch and clean and jerk. They may also work out at similar intensities some of the time, but there's also going to be a whole lot of other stuff for the health and longevity, going and slacklining for fun, rock climbing, trying different physical activities that are more specific to just having a more well-rounded life or degree of physical function, compared to, I'm training for performance and I want to achieve this one very specific physical goal.
Yeah, one of the pushbacks I often get whenever I have this conversation, especially with parents, right? Parents of athletes, is, well, hockey's a healthy sport to participate in. I'm like, oh, really? Really? Sliding
concussion
around,
rates, broken bones.
Well, just at the very base, you're sliding around on razor blades, chasing a frozen piece of rubber with a stick while other people try to physically assault you.
Yeah.
It doesn't sound very healthy to me.
It's a pretty accurate depiction as to what it is.
Right? Or, even basketball.
No.
Basketball, it's a healthy sport.
Yeah.
Sure, you're running full steam and changing directions on a surface against other people who are trying to stop you from doing that, while they also try to physically assault you without getting caught.
Yep.
Okay, cool. The caveat to everything that we're talking about is a healthier athlete will always perform better than an unhealthy athlete. So this is where, to me, the art of what we do comes into play, because health spans far beyond just my joints don't hurt. It's also I wake up rested from my night of sleep. It's I digest my food well. It's I have meaningful relationships with my family, my partner, my friends. It's we can sit on the couch and have dogs hang out around us, or that I can go out and eat a meal without overthinking about the macros involved in it. That's all part of health.
100%.
But when we shift from performance, or shift to health from performance, part of that goes out the window. And you have to have the understanding as the coach to have the conversation with your clients. Like, to me, I think that's what's missing. So you cannot treat every client as if they're going to be Mr. Olympia or a world champion.
Most won't be.
Most will not. Well, 99.99999% of them will not be. Some of them want to approach training and nutrition and performance as if they were going to be, and that's totally okay.
Absolutely.
But some of them want to be healthy while also pursuing high performance. For you, how do you frame that conversation and maybe frame the intervention? Because you have to get them the results that they want. They want to perform well, but they also want the other stuff too.
So here's where the client-centered approach comes into play. It starts with a conversation of, what are your goals? Like the first time I sit down with somebody, it's always the same sort of framework. It's, who is this person sitting in front of me and how can I best help them? If they tell me their goal is XYZ, okay, cool. Do they currently understand what is actually going to entail chasing down that goal? If they don't, we'll probably start there with education around, this is what it entails. This is how hard we might have to train, how many times per week.
Dude, that's probably the conversation I have the most with people.
Absolutely.
Especially when I start with them. Whether it's, someone who wants to lose 10 pounds or gain 10 pounds,
Yeah.
or someone who wants to set world records in powerlifting or step on stage in bodybuilding, it's like, do you know what that actually requires?
Yeah.
So many people make goals and have no idea what those goals
No.
what's required to reach them.
Everybody likes to set goals, right? But following the plan that is required to get to said goal is a totally different story. Setting the goal is just writing it down on a piece of paper. Mm-hmm. And that's the first step to achieving the goal. Like we have to do that as a prerequisite to reach said goal. But when we start to outline what does that process look like, especially if it's like a multi-year process, some people may get completely dissuaded from it and go, you know what, actually, I think my goal is in a little bit of a different direction than I thought it was in. Mm. Some people might think that, okay, the plan that you're outlining is what they want to do, and then they try it for a couple months, 6 months, 2, 3, 4 years, and then realize, oh, you know what, actually, I thought I wanted to go here. Maybe I actually just want to go here. And that provides a little bit more leeway with which to enjoy my life more throughout the process. Or just have a little bit more flexibility in terms of, being a little bit more social on Fridays and Saturdays or things like that, or trying out different physical activities as opposed to just, okay, I thought I wanted to be the gold medal winning insert athletics here. Cool, I'm going to do that 20 hours a week, every week for the next 10 years. Most people are not going to end up doing that or wanting to do that as they get further and further along the process.
Something that I would love to pick your brain on is the idea of sport or performance as part of the identity. Mm. This is something that's been on my mind a lot. Mm-hmm. And you having the experience that you have both on the performance, the coaching, and the clinical side. Mm-hmm. When people get injured, mm-hmm. they lose a sense of self. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about that.
I think first and foremost, sport, there's so rarely do I meet somebody who is, or work with somebody who they are participating in sport at a reasonable to high level and it's not part of their identity. Like if you're doing something X amount of time during the week, it doesn't even have to be an excessive amount of time during the week. It probably makes up some component of who you are, just like any of the other things that you do in your life. Like I am a weightlifter and I'm a physio and I'm a strength coach. I'm also a brother. I'm a son of my parents. I'm a local resident of Dundas, and we have all of these different puzzle pieces that make up who we are. And some puzzle pieces are bigger than others. Yeah. But when one of those pieces gets shattered or damaged or injured in the context of what you're bringing up, no kidding, it affects our psychosocial beliefs and our attitudes and our expectations around how we're going to move forward. What is that puzzle going to look like as a whole if I take that one piece out? And so I think that some individuals are a very well-balanced mix of different pieces. And then there are some individuals who their entire puzzle is made up of 2 or 3 or maybe even one piece. And I'm a big proponent of having balance in life. It's not to say that we can't be high achievers and push for the things that we care deeply about. But having balance and having a mix of different things you're interested in and ways that you want to spend your time is very important, because things are going to happen to one of those pieces periodically throughout your life. Like you're going to deal with injuries as an athlete. You're going to deal with loss as somebody who has relationships with other people. And so we have to be balanced such that to some degree almost to mitigate the effect that a single piece might be.
It's like diversifying your investments.
Yeah. And there might be seasons of your life where some of those pieces are a little bit bigger. Like if you genuinely are trying to win an Olympic gold medal in a given sport, like your life is mainly training. And
it's not balanced.
Yeah, but if that's your goal and you're genuinely working towards that, following the plan that it requires, cool. If that's what's important to you, that's what's important to you. But it is important to have that balance for general life.
Yeah, I'm gonna push back on you a little bit because I personally don't like the term balance.
Okay.
I like integration. So
Okay.
I think balance to me, and this is a personal bias, it just speaks to mediocrity. Whenever I hear someone say balance, I'm like, you're never going to achieve anything great if you're balanced.
Yeah.
But balance can exist on the macro level while you're incredibly unbalanced on the micro level.
Sure.
So, even using my current lifestyle as an example, like Liv and I both work 60 to 80 hours a week. We train 15, 20 hours a week. Very little of what we do exists outside of this house, the gym, and our computers. But there are weeks out of the year where we go to Puerto Rico and disconnect. There are periods like, in a couple of weeks, we're going to Vegas for 3 days just to have some fun and disconnect, right? So we've integrated those periods of disconnection to achieve macro level balance. And when it comes to your mindset around performance, to me, in order to achieve anything great, there has to be, like, there's no CEO on this planet of a multi-million-dollar company who is balanced.
Right.
There's no gold medal winner who is balanced. But who's to say that if that fulfills them, then that's totally okay?
Yeah.
Because it's all relative.
100%.
That's the way I look at it. When we tie in the idea of identity, one of the most powerful, and I'm tempted to put you on the spot here, but okay, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
One of the most powerful questions I've ever been asked was a guest on the podcast. His name is Keir Wenham-Flatt. He founded a company called the Rugby Strength Coach and then the Strength Coach Network. Incredibly intelligent gentleman. Total shit poster. So if you follow him, he's hilarious. He asked me, he goes, if you could not use your family, your job, or your hobbies to describe who you were, who are you?
Right, say that one more time.
So who are you?
Yeah.
But you cannot use your family, your job, or your hobbies to describe who you are.
I'm the makeup of the traits and virtues that I try to embody. I'm somebody who's empathetic. I strive to be somebody who is empathetic, who's respectful, who serves others, who is loyal and trustworthy and disciplined and meticulous.
Right. Which is why you choose the activities, hobbies, profession, and things. So that to me is the difference. So when I know. So 5 years ago, for those of you who are watching still, he's 70 pounds. So he's not a small boy. If my injury had happened 5 years ago, I would have been completely fucked. Mentally, emotionally fucked. Because every part of my identity was tied into Paul the powerlifter. I wouldn't even count powerlifting. At the time of my injury, wouldn't even count powerlifting in the top 5. I'm someone who does hard things. I'm someone who pursues challenges in every aspect of my life. I'm a servant to those that I care about. Like, all of these things are elements of who I am. Now that I've had experiences multiple times where training has been taken away from me because of injury. I don't use it as a coping strategy anymore. And it is just something that I do. But having those experiences has allowed me to serve other people. And I'm sure who are going through similar experiences, I'm sure for you, dealing with the injured athlete is a whole new can of worms.
Absolutely.
Like, talk to me a little bit about maybe the changes in approach that you would have, understanding that, hey, this person is hurt, but not only are they hurt, psychosocially, they're fucked up even worse.
I think that's where, so that's where the art of dealing with people comes into play. Like, we have to zoom out from the what sets and reps are we doing, and how long are our training sessions, and we start to have these conversations around what are the things these individuals care about, like in the short term, where are their priorities. so this becomes, it's still an extension of the coaching relationship, right?
Yeah.
Like we're just focused less on the bio and more on the psychosocial. The conversations that we're going to have in those circumstances are going to be more around problem solving, right? How do we, something has happened. It's taken us away from this perfect plan that we've created. And so now evidently, for better or for worse, the individual is injured, typically for worse, but maybe in the long term, you learn some things and it's for the better. And so the individual ends up injured. The thing that they're trying to do, they're no longer able to do to the extent that they want to be able to do it. That's hard. It sucks. It really brings to light how well does this individual face adversity, and how well can they problem solve and deal with the challenges that are in front of them. And sometimes that requires a little bit of guidance to help them navigate. And that's part of our role as coaches, not just to help them when things are easy, but more particularly when things get challenging, helping to steer them in the right path.
Something that you mentioned but kind of glossed over was the fact that every single thing that you talked about is the same thing that allowed them to be a high performer in the first place.
Sure.
That was something that was a bit eye-opening for me. It's like, well, everything that allowed me to be the athlete that I was,
Yeah,
is the exact same thing that's going to allow me to get out of the situation
yeah,
I'm in.
yeah.
So that has really helped me speak to my clients a little bit differently
Mm-hmm.
in the face of injury. It's like, yeah, you're hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can't train the way that we need to, but guess what? That same dedication, that same problem solving, that same authority and autonomy that you had, is still there.
Absolutely.
That control is still there. Playing into this piece, you now have a lot of experience working with like an aging population.
Mm-hmm.
How do you address this notion? I'll frame it in a way that most of the listeners will understand a little bit better. So at some point you will have lifted your heaviest weight.
Yes, I've thought about that a couple of times.
I'm never squatting 800 again.
Uh-huh.
Right? I got into training to see how strong I could get.
Mm-hmm.
I found it.
Mm-hmm.
What now?
Mm-hmm.
That's something that I'm noticing as the demographic of clients that I work with does get a little bit older.
Mm-hmm.
They have this idea that their best performances are behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, depending on the age and the injury history, things like that, maybe they're in a period of regression.
Mm-hmm.
How do you have that discussion with them to keep the motivation high, to keep training, to keep pushing, when in reality, the idea of progression might not be there?
So first it comes back to this original piece, which is what is the thing that we're training towards? What is our goal? What is like, and sometimes with the individuals that I tend to work with these days, it's a lot more, how can I best participate in my day-to-day life versus like, I don't know, somebody who's 60 years old asking me how I can help them squat 800 pounds. Like it's not really a conversation that has come up yet.
There's many 60-year-olds that want to do that.
And you know what? I haven't had that conversation yet. So I don't know if I have a good answer for that specifically, but it comes down to what is the thing that we're trying to train towards? What does the individual want to get out of their physical practice in a manner that will foster a positive degree of participation in their day-to-day life and the activities they want to perform?
Yeah, I always come back to like, the goal is to progressively overload.
Yeah.
Right? Always.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can we create progressive overload within areas that can still be progressed?
Mm-hmm.
Can we switch the goal? So let's say, I can't be as strong as I ever have been.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be.
Sure.
I can still put on muscle, right? I can still aim to move better. I can still pick certain skills in the weight room to progress. So there are elements of progression that I can choose that can still move forward. I'm working with an older lady now who, for all intents and purposes, she used to be a fitness competitor and a model. And she's facing this idea that like, I'll never be as thin and attractive as I used to be, which is a profoundly deep insecurity that she is facing as she ages. So the conversation around, well, what can you progress at? And for her, it's her relationship with food. It's her relationship with training, the way that these are things that aren't necessarily objective. But when you address the situation, the mindset, things like that, they can be put on paper, especially when it has, effects on quality of life. Is that something that you address? Like, I mean, you mentioned keep the goal, right? What is the goal that we're trying to progress towards? And let's figure that. Are you actively playing a role with clients to like guide them towards certain goals that may be more appropriate? Because a lot of people are clueless.
Absolutely.
Because they only know what they know.
Yeah. I try to start, I try to abstain as much as possible from influencing them picking their goal, because I want them, I really do want this to be a client-centered process. I don't want to impose my beliefs and expectations on them. However, as we start to have conversation, and this is, over the course of the couple days to weeks to months to maybe even years that we form these professional relationships, the things that I know that they like to do, they probably, maybe just an educated guess, but they probably want to do those things a little bit better or more. And so an example here is I have some clients who are really into golf. And so we frame, sure, take it as you will. I started playing a couple of years ago. I'm terrible at it, but it's actually kind of fun.
Bro, ask me to go for a walk in nature. 10 out of 10, sign me up. I'll have a great time.
Sure.
Ask me to do that while swinging a stick. I'd rather eat glass. Anyway, continue.
It's not the worst activity if you can embrace being bad at it. So it comes full circle to my my philosophy. Anyways, we're trying, I'm working with them so that we can improve strength, endurance, stamina, coordination, balance, mobility, like all of the things that we work on in fitness. And we frame it in the context of improving golf. Right? Because the golf is important to them. And so when we talk about what do we want to achieve this year in training, is it, is it I want to curl X amount of weight? Is it I want to squat X amount of weight? Like maybe, but maybe it's those things because it contributes to a further drive or being able to have better endurance for walking all 18 holes of the course. And so I'm going to use my expertise to help guide them to the method with which we'll achieve the thing. But they might have a pretty good sense already for the most part of like, how do they like to spend their time? What are the activities they like to do? Can I help them as a coach better be able to participate in those activities? Cool. That's what we're going to work on.
I love it. Let's transition to some more like quick hit questions as we tidy this up. What was the most valuable lesson that you learned in your undergrad or in your education?
You said quick. Now I have to think about this. It's really important to fail at things.
Great lesson.
It's really, really important to fail at things.
What about the most important, most valuable lesson you've learned in practice so far?
Manage your time well and keep a calendar.
How did that bite you in the ass?
It didn't, because I did it proactively, but I have like severe ADHD, like diagnosed as I was a kid. Okay. I have the attention span of a squirrel. 3 dogs running around here. I'm like, oh my God, I want to just look at them the entire podcast.
Oh, me too.
And so if I don't write something down, it's never going to get done. So my Google Calendar runs my life. And the method for success that I found for myself is if I put something that I have to do into my calendar, I know that I can stop thinking about it, and then I just look at what am I supposed to do at a given day, at a given hour, and then it gets done.
That's the same
Keep
thing.
a calendar, 100%.
That's the same thing I do. I have I have my calendar of all my meetings, and then I have time blocked out every day for what I call my non-negotiables.
Yeah.
And I have a daily meeting at the beginning of every day that has those non-negotiable tasks in it. So things like, on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I do my newsletter. Every day I have to video review. I have to do video reviews for my clients. Sundays and Tuesdays, those are check-in days. So those are all on there. What it ends up being is like when I first started the business, it was 2 to 3 tasks a day, most of which was focused on like serving the clients that I had and maybe learning social media. But now as we grow the business, there are other tasks that I have to do like email marketing and website build out, budgeting and things like that. So those all go in there. I don't have to worry about my budget because I know on Fridays, I look at my budget. This idea of discipline equals freedom, like Jocko Willink's famous quote, I think is so great. It's like, if I'm disciplined and I know exactly what I have to do when, I have the freedom to to live my life.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause I love checking boxes.
Yeah.
My to-do list, like when I click off the reminder,
Yeah.
like done, I get the biggest dopamine hit.
Absolutely.
Super motivating. What's the biggest mistake that you've made?
The biggest mistake that I've made. So something that I used to not do well was failing to realize that successful plans are malleable plans. I think that this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently. When we create plans, when we set goals, when we're trying to create strategies or ways to achieve certain things, we create that plan with all of the information we have up until that present moment. And then we go off into the future. So the plan is created, and then now I'm going to go try and follow the plan. But maybe your car breaks down the next day. Maybe you have a nightmare that night, and so you don't get enough sleep, and you have low energy. And like, we have to be adaptable in order to be successful, because one of an infinite number of things could happen that will completely derail that plan for a day, a week, a month. Maybe it totally throws the plan out the window. And so I used to be very rigid in my thinking of, okay, if X, then Y. If I create it this way, everything has to operate in that manner. Failing to understand that like life is so unpredictable in so many regards. Did you expect that you were going to tear your knees and like, right? And so it's like, we have to understand that there's a degree of malleability that's required for plans to be successful. Now, we don't want to go so far as saying, hey, we're going to create a plan and okay, something went wrong, so we're just going to throw it out the window for the sake of I don't like it anymore. Like, we need some degree of rigidity, a fair degree of rigidity for our plans to be successful, but they have to be malleable to be successful.
Yeah, I think mine would play very well into that. I used to be very, very rigid in my approach to things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of my biggest mistakes was like holding my opinions too strongly.
Mm-hmm.
I actively now seek to challenge my own opinions, and I'll seek out alternate viewpoints to see if I can steel man the argument.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I can, then great, I'm going to learn something. If I can't, well, then it just reaffirms my position and I can go try some other way of
Absolutely.
changing my mind. Last question for you. If there was a billboard on the side of a highway that you could put up with anything that you wanted on it, what would it be?
The only person that can do it is you.
I very much can get behind that.
Yeah.
I love it. I have a personal philosophy on ownership.
Mm-hmm.
It is, like I have a tattoo of Atlas on my arm. It's like he's holding up the world because it's a symbol for like I hold the world and I can create it in the way that I want to create it. And I think if we can teach our clients that they're in control and put them in positions to reaffirm that, we're never going to have problems.
Yeah.
If there's one person that you would like to see me interview on the podcast, who would it be? The caveat is you have to help me get them on the podcast.
That's a great question. My high school gym and math and exercise science teacher, Mr. Phone, because he is the reason I'm sitting here. He taught me everything that I know about in my formative years about goal setting and fostered a love of kinesiology and exercise science and physio. And yeah,
that'd actually be a pretty good interview. Dan, thank you so much for joining me and tolerating the chaos.
Absolutely.
Stelly, you want to send everybody off? I'll have links to where everyone can find you in the show notes.
Amazing.
Thank you guys so much for joining. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and we'll catch you on the next one.